Thank you, everyone, for joining me for these live internet studies. My name is Ariel Ben Lyman Hanavi, and the live internet study is an hour and a half long. It is broken up into two segments. Segment one is an hour long, given over to a study called Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events, where we talk about end-time topics with a view towards actually really doing a study on the book of Revelation, almost a verse by verse. But as you can see on your screen right now, there's a topical index made up of 18 different topics, and we've been working our way from 1 all the way down through. We're almost right in the middle. We're right at topic number 10 now. We just finished looking at Matthew chapter 24 with Yeshua's Olivet Discourse, Part 1 and 2. That was topic 8 and 9. Now we're ready to jump headlong into a topic that is quite popular, according to my estimation and my experience with dealing with these topics. We're going to be talking about rapture views, and this will just be an overview tonight. For those of you who've never studied end-time prophecy or eschatology, anything like that, this is the topic that, in my experience, again, from traveling and speaking at different churches and having studies online, this is the topic that is either very controversial, you get really heated and emotional about it, or you just tune out and you say, well, you know, I don't really care if there's a rapture or when it will be, if there is one, because it'll just kind of all pan out in the end. It'll all just work itself out. God will work everything out. I don't need to focus on anything. And just to be sure, I want to make sure that people know that in this set of topics of 10, 11, and 12, where we're going to be focusing on rapture, what I'm not going to be doing is date setting. No, no, and no. I'm not trying to make any claims on when I know, if I know when Jesus is returning, etc., etc. Although, within the scope of a study on eschatology, there is the sense that if you take a literal face value hermeneutic and approach the Bible in a normative sense of the words were given so that we could better understand God and his plans, in other words, the Bible wasn't given to confuse us. If you take a face value hermeneutic and do not spiritualize everything away, then, or allegorize, then I believe that there are details about the second coming of Yeshua that can be known, perhaps even down to the day. And we've talked about that in the past. There are certainly themes and symbols and signs, I believe, that we should be looking for that will indicate certain events are about to take place or are taking place, or etc., etc. So while date setting is something that I shy away from, I absolutely do endorse or encourage people to believe that the topics that we're going to be talking about can be best understood if you interpret them in a literal manner. So we should be looking for certain things down the road. And when I say we, I'm talking about believers. Obviously, the world in large doesn't really have a perspective, a clue. They're largely in the dark. And we'll be talking about that. So let me give you kind of an overview of where we're going to go in this part, this topic 10, 11, and 12, which, as far as I can tell, just by looking at the sheer number of tabs I've got open in my browser right now, about 20 or so, this topic is going to stretch out easily a few months. But I hope you don't get lost because of the forest, forest for the trees principle. So let me just jump through some of the tabs real quick and show you in advance, kind of pique your interest, whet your appetite as to where we're going to be going in this topic 10, 11, 12 on the rapture and things like that. So just first, looking at the topic list, topic 10 is rapture views and overview. There are 3, maybe 4 main rapture views within Christian circles that we're going to be looking at. And it's helpful to get an idea of what those views are and why. We'll look at that first. We might even be able to cover all of that tonight, because that's somewhat short, tonight and tomorrow or something like that. And then from there, we'll jump into the part that's going to occupy most of the meat of this topic, this section, which is topic 11, making a case for the pre-wrath view of the rapture. And if you've never heard that term before, I encourage you to give me an audience. Just let me try to present a case where I believe that this is a view worth sitting up and listening to or worth taking serious. And if you hold to one of the other views, that's fine. As I'm going to mention over and over again during this section, what view of rapture you hold to, whether it's one of the 3 or 4, or whether you don't have any belief in a rapture at all. The most important part is, do you have a relationship with Yeshua? That's the most important part, because no matter what view you're holding, you must have a perspective that Yeshua is Lord in order for you to be counted among the righteous and to be in a place where God's coming kingdom is of benefit to you. In other words, obviously, if you're not a Christian, then none of this really matters to you. Allow the gospel to penetrate your hardened heart first. That's the priority. So we'll make a case for a pre-wrath view. I say we. I'm going to push hard for that. It's only because this is the view that I believe is not only the more accurate scriptural view, but I also believe that it is a view that in the end will prepare us as Christians, as a church, as a body of believers, both Jew and Gentile. It will prepare us to understand where we might be able to where we might play a part in God's end time scenarios as everything's coming down. Remember, there's a lot of players in this end time game. There's not just Christians in the church. There's Israel, both saved and unsaved. There's the world at large. There's the evil coming new world order. There's going to be a lot of moving parts, and as far as I can understand, it's going to affect everyone on planet Earth in one way or another. So to the degree that you are either prepared or caught off guard, then you might want to start paying attention to some of the details about this end time drama that's about to unfold. So topic 11 is going to take a lot of time because I don't want to lose anyone. I want to put as much detail in there so that I can answer questions and present a case efficiently, completely. And then lastly, we'll round out the whole kind of rapture topic with topic 12. Rapture views, a final analysis, kind of put a bow on it, see where we've come. Draw some conclusions. I'll even do some parts where I will purposely look at the weaknesses of the view that I hold to, known as a pre-wrath view. And so, in all fairness, to let people come to their own decisions. So let's look at some, just like I'm going to flash through some of the tabs that I've got open, just show you where I'm going to be going. As we should always be doing, there are major parts of the Bible that should be driving your theology and your understanding of any given topic. Don't just follow any given pastor or internet teacher or read any book and go, wow, I liked what I read, I liked what I heard, and therefore I'm going to follow that perspective because it tickled my emotional ears. Don't do that. All right, be a Berean. Take all of your theology back to the Bible as the ultimate source. So with that, I'm just jumping through some passages that I can recommend. They're very brief, really, but Daniel 12 has a lot of detail as far as a kind of a building up to the giving some timing of some of the major events that will happen when we start getting down to what we're going to be calling the last 7 years of humanity or history on planet Earth, prior to the millennial kingdom being ushered in, the 1,000-year time frame when Jesus will reign bodily here from planet Earth, from Israel, from Jerusalem as his capital. So Daniel 12 is a good place in the Old Testament to get a lot of information. Of course, you started your reading, I hope, in Daniel chapter 2, where the vision was given, the dream was given to the king, and you worked your way from 2 all the way up to 12. So 12 is like the culmination, but 12 has a lot of detail about some of the timing. If you look for the themes and look at the language used, it'll line up. There are a lot of parallels between Daniel and other parts that we're going to see here in a moment. And we're not going to read through all Daniel 12 and stuff like that. In fact, I'm only showing you these just because I want you to have this in your mind when we're studying all of these details. Matthew 24, we already looked at that. It is a major portion of the Bible where you would and could be camped out if you were doing a major study the likes of the one I'm doing. Matthew 24 is the Olivet Discourse version in Matthew, and we already looked at that in previous studies, so go back and watch previous videos. Along with Matthew, we have Mark's rendering, Mark 13, which is also the Olivet Discourse, but given from Mark's perspective, a lot shorter, leaves out some of the details that Matthew captures. We also have Luke 17, which pulls in language about the end time scenario that we're going to be looking at, the last 7 years of for wicked humanity to make a desperate attempt to either establish their champion player, which is the Antichrist, and throw off the rule of God and his Messiah, or to be literally brought to their knees in judgment by God just before God brings in his true champion, which of course is Yeshua, the Messiah, and ushers in and establishes his 1,000-year kingdom here on earth. So Luke 17 is a parallel passage to Matthew and Mark. We also have Luke 21, which is this kind of the part 2 of the Olivet Discourse from Luke's rendering, why those two-part chapters were split up when Bible translators put the Bibles together. I don't know why. It would have been easier just to put the Luke 17 information and 21 information back together, but oh well. Another major passage that I would highly recommend you study is the entirety of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. This is Paul's teaching on the resurrection, and this includes language which, let me just double check. Yeah, this is the part in Paul's letters. You can see I search for the word mystery in this chapter. This is where Paul lets us know that this idea of rapture is tied to resurrection, which was already given way back in Daniel. In fact, Daniel 12 talks about resurrection. Other passages in the Bible talk about resurrection. But the thing that makes it important for our studies is that from Paul's perspective, resurrection is something that even ancient Israel was told about. And yet, as the church, which was a mystery to ancient Israel, to national Israel, the Gentile church was a mystery to Israel, so is the rapture part where, and I'm going to be very careful in the way I'm describing this, where believers in Yeshua are caught up bodily, live, to meet the resurrected saints in the air. So the resurrection is the resurrection of the dead. But what about people who are alive when Yeshua returns, when the second coming takes place? What happens to them? Well, Paul gives the answer here in 1 Corinthians. So read the entire chapter. It is the classic resurrection / rapture passage, along with the one I'm going to show you now, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Yeah, this is a biggie. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, read the whole passage, the whole chapter. It's almost like his follow-up letter to the Corinthians passage, where it's a heavy resurrection passage and rapture passage, but now he also starts giving some more details concerning Antichrist's rule, and the tribulation that's going to happen, the deception that's going to come on planet Earth, etc. A lot of good and valuable information that Christians can learn, and Jews, if they would just read the New Testament, but unfortunately a lot of them aren't. But in fact, almost none of them are, unless they're doing it in secret, not telling their rabbis. So 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, which goes right into 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. So both chapters, 4 and 5 of 1 Thessalonians, are going to start giving details about this time period that's called resurrection / mystery rapture, and what Christians have become to commonly call the Great Tribulation. So both of those chapters are very important. And then his second letter to the Thessalonians, this time 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, gives a lot of detail that picks up where the first letters left off, filling in even more detail about the timing of all of the information that Paul must have gleaned from studying the Master's teachings. Remember, Paul wasn't there when Yeshua was, at least as far as I know, wasn't there when Yeshua was doing his ministry on the Mount of Olives and walking around with the disciples and things like that. So we know that Paul came later, but the teachings of Yeshua were certainly circulating in oral fashion, if not beginning to be written down eventually. So Paul was obviously aware of Yeshua's theology on end-time events, and thus, when Paul wrote his letters, he's writing with parallels that were taken from the Matthew Olivet Discourse chapters that I just flashed before you earlier. Along with that, we all obviously can't leave out the book of Revelation. It's a heavy player. And what's unique about the book of Revelation is, as far as I can tell, and most other Christian students of the Bible, Revelation came way after Paul. And so Revelation is obviously details that are given to the Christian church, the body of Messiah, well after not only Paul's letters had circulated, long after I should say long, but years after the temple had already been destroyed, Jerusalem had been attacked and surrounded by armies and things like that. Suddenly Revelation comes in the 90s, where John's exiled on the island of Patmos, and John gives all these details that really are a fitting conclusion to God's view of drawing all of his plans to a close, bringing history to a climax of judgment on wicked humanity and blessing and reward for those who have found themselves to be righteous in God's sight because they placed their faith in Messiah, or they have at least been brought to a place where they have placed their faith in God and they're being introduced to this idea of Jesus when he comes back. So either way you look at it, the book of Revelation is absolutely critical to an end time view. Of course, it doesn't help that it's so difficult to understand, right? I won't lie. There's a lot of challenges in the book of Revelation, but when the time comes, we'll do our best to work our way through it. And then the last part that I'm focusing is, I said Revelation, but for timing purpose and details, I'm specifically recommending Revelation chapter 6, which begins what we call the opening of this large scroll in the hands of God. And Yeshua is the one who's opening these seals on the outside of the scroll. So that starts in Revelation chapter 6. And then as far as the details of rapture, if I want to use that word, and in the sense that most Christians understand it, Revelation 7 contains language that would indicate that rapture is probably something that's being discussed there. So those are the Bible passages. Now, let me jump through real quick. I'm going to flash these by and not spend a lot of time on them. Some graphics that I'll be using, they are all primarily the same type of graphic, which is a snapshot or picture of the 7-year time on planet Earth that is called either by the 7-year tribulation, Daniel's 70th week, the 7th week of Daniel, the 7-year tribulation, the final, the Daniel's 7, or the last 490th 7, or whatever you want to call it. So the first one is a picture that just shows the 4 primary views of rapture that I'm going to be discussing. You can see them on your screen here in the order that this slide shows: pre-trib, mid-trib, pre-wrath, and post-trib. And the word trib there is short for tribulation. The bottom of the chart shows a 7-year slice known as the tribulation according to most Christians' perspective. And therefore, when we're asking when is the rapture itself, this time that's described as this catching away where Christians are snatched up, yanked up, shot up into the air. If you want to think of it kind of like an alien abduction, if it's cool for you in your mind, then go ahead. I don't mind. But getting sucked up from planet Earth up into the air to be with Jesus and then eventually go on to heaven, or if you think we're going to go up real quick and then do a U-turn and come right back down, we'll talk about that in time as well. But here's the 4 views that are primarily the ones that most Christians are going to encounter when they're having this type of discussion. Here's another chart that shows the exact same thing, but the only difference, and this is the way they're laid out, is the one I'm going to be working from mostly. We still have pre-trib at the top because it puts the rapture at the farthest left of your screen at the beginning of the 7 years. That's the classic pre-trib, pre-tribulationism, pre-tribulational. So pre-trib is the shortened way of saying that. Pre-trib rapture. In other words, the rapture takes place pre or prior to any tribulation. But moving down the list, we've got mid-trib, and then below that, we've got post-trib. And then we've got the last one on the list, which is pre-wrath. I'm going to work my way down using this kind of timing, where I'm going to talk first about pre-trib rapture, then I'm going to be talking about mid-trib rapture, then I'm going to talk about post-trib, where again, you see that little burst of yellow kind of star-looking graphic figure on your screen here. That's called the rapture. It takes place either at the beginning of the 7 years, in the middle of the 7 years, at the end of the 7 years, or this one at the very bottom called pre-wrath, where it's not quite in the middle and it's not quite at the end. It's somewhere in the middle of the second half of the 7 years. So it's after the midpoint, but prior to the final 7, prior to the end there. And then, of course, noticeable is the big yellow slice on the far right of your slide that says kingdom. What is that? That's the 1,000-year kingdom that Yeshua is ushering in, which I believe is literal. But when we're talking about pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, pre-wrath, all of the views that we're going to be looking at have this understanding that there will be a kingdom that's being ushered in, and that it is necessary for God to allow this 7-year time period to culminate with the ushering in of the kingdom. Thus, the kingdom really is the kingdom of Yeshua really is the reason why we're bringing history up to this final moment. Why judgment has to be poured out, why there must be a rapture, why there will be the man of lawlessness. It's because Jesus is going to reign, and he will not reign from Jerusalem in the condition that it's in right now, right, with all the mess that's going on over there in the Middle East. So there's got to be a lot of changes between now and the bringing in of the kingdom. Let's look at some more graphics real quick. These are other graphics that are going to show up in my own short essay that I put together 25 years ago. Here's the order that I'm going to hit them. Here's the same slide, but zoomed in a little bit. Pre-trib rapture. Following that, mid-trib rapture. Following that, post-trib rapture. Following that, pre-wrath rapture. So those are the 4 views that I'm primarily going to be working from. I've not forgotten about my brothers and sisters who are in churches and congregations that hold to something that would be maybe labeled the second Exodus view, or some people refer to it as the Goshen principle, or something to the effect that's more along the lines of theology that's more aligned with Israel's perspective of what's going on. Up to this point, as you can probably tell, a lot of the rapture language, rapture theology, rapture discussions are almost what you might call Christian centric. They're very appealing to Christians in Christian churches, Gentile Christians to be sure, because all of the language talks about, hey, we're going to escape all this mess. We're going to be yanked up into the air and be with Jesus. We don't have to be around for all this 7-year nonsense that's going to be coming down the pike. Well, yeah, that's obviously appealing if you don't want to be around for that. I mean, hello, who wants to be around when the Antichrist forces everybody to take a mark to buy and sell? You know, or it's going to lop off your head if you thumb your nose at them, disagree with them, right? No one wants to be around for that, obviously. Well, for Christians, this is appealing. So when we're talking about rapture, it seems like a very Christianized, Gentilized concept. But what about Israel? Where does Israel fit into the picture? And so this is where a lot of Messianic congregations have tried to make sense of this whole end time scenario and said, wait a minute. We believe we're part of Israel. We don't believe we're just part of this dispensational separate body known as the church, where we're completely separate from Israel. We believe we've been grafted into Israel. We're one with Israel. There's one giant olive tree. So what does Israel have to say about this rapture, right? How does that fit with our theology of understanding that Israel is the group that we're grafted into? Well, I don't have a slide for that yet, per se. Let me look. Yeah, I don't. I don't have a slide for that, per se. So let me park it on that. And I haven't found one yet, we'll put it that way. But this idea that there's this greater exodus where God rescued Israel and protected her supernaturally during the original first Exodus that we know about from the Passover stories and the reading of the book of Exodus. You know, Israel didn't get snatched away from the 10 plagues that were poured out. Instead, if you know the story, and if you don't know it, then I'm spoiling it for you, so spoiler alert, Israel was hunkered down. They were right where they were all along. Instead, what God did is he supernaturally protected them from the brunt of the plagues that were hitting Egypt. He made a bubble. He protected them in the midst of the judgment that was falling on Egypt. So instead of yanking them out of the way and then pouring out judgment like the rapture scenarios kind of talk about, he actually just protected them right where they're at. So we call that the Goshen principle, the land of Goshen, in that place where the plagues were being poured out, but God protected his people. And then it wasn't until after the plagues were all done, when Egypt was ruined, that they finally made their exodus out of ruined Egypt through the Red Sea and then finally into the Promised Land, etc., etc. So if there's going to be a greater one of these at the end of time for Israel, well then it's not necessary to have this rapture. I'm using air quotes with my fingers for people who can't see. It's not necessary to have this rapture, so to say, that would allow for people to be yanked up into the air and then drop back down on planet Earth and whatever. So instead, maybe God can simply do what he did before. He can supernaturally protect his people in the midst of all of this judgment that's going to be being poured out. Supernaturally, I mean, God can do that. Obviously, he's done it before, so there's precedent for it. So maybe that's the best way to understand the end time scenario. We'll get to that in time. So I'm going to be talking about that when the time comes. Is there really going to be a greater exodus? Is that the way we should better understand the New Testament passages about Jesus' return? Is there just one coming where he's just going to show up, grab the Christians, group us together with the Jews, and then establish his kingdom, pour out judgment? It'll be really, really quick, and then the kingdom comes. We'll talk about that.